What's up, everybody? It's Dave Wallace from the Medal of Honor show, and I'm here to do another spin-off show, something I'm going to put out maybe once a month, just a little something extra to get you by. It keeps me busy, and it's just something fun to do. I'm going to do sort of a list show. This is called 6 Records. So each episode, we'll take the top 6 records pertaining to whatever topic, whether it be, 6 albums of one particular band that I love, or 6 bands from one genre, or 6 albums that made me cry one day. I don't know. Obviously that didn't happen. And I'm going to be asking you, like what kind of topics you would like to hear. Obviously it's going to be from my point of view. You're not always going to agree with it. That's what's fun about this stuff. So anyway, the obvious question would be, why 6 records? Why not 10 records? And the answer is, every time I do a show, I think, well, this is only going to be, a half-hour long show. It ends up being an hour. I started off with 10 records, and I thought, what, let's try and chop this down a little bit. I like to gab when it comes to metal. Any other time, I never want to talk to people. But get me going on metal music, and I just keep gabbing. So I cut it down to 6 records. I could have gone 5, but then I just thought that was kind of a little typical. And so, how metal would it be to do 6? So anyway, 6 records. For the first episode, what I'm going to do is 6 records that had a profound effect on my life as far as my musical tastes as a music collector and as a musician. So I just thought that this might be a good way to kind of open it up, and I'm going to give you my list, show you the albums, and then maybe if you get a chance, you could, in the comments, put 6 favorite albums of yours that have had a big effect on your life. These will not necessarily be my favorite albums of each band, but it's going to be the album from that band that, like I said, made some kind of change in me, maybe introduced me to that band or to a genre of music. So we'll describe all that as we go along. All right, so without further ado, let's get this new show rolling. 6 records that had a profound effect on my life and my music tastes. For number 6, I started off with something that got me more into death metal, as far as being able to get into what later would progress into extreme death metal or black metal. I feel like there's a big difference between, your standard rock and heavy metal and clean vocals, and that death metal. A lot of people have a hard time getting over the guttural vocal style. It's something that they only hear screaming, and once you've learned to appreciate that, it opens up the doors to so many different kinds of music for you. So, number 6 for me is Death, the Human album. I talked about this album in a previous episode of my show, but this one for me really got me into this kind of music because it is really more of a progressive metal. Chuck Schuldner's playing is just unbelievable. All the musicians that he ever chose to play with were always phenomenal, and just some really great technical stuff on here, and that was what kind of got me into the death metal style. Hearing that he could actually make something really strong in musicality and still have that really aggressive style of vocals kind of just opened up my eyes to new things. I didn't like the style of music when I first heard it, but again, this kind of broke me into it. So number 6, Death, Human. For number 5, I wanted to have the bridge that took me from heavy metal, standard heavy metal kind of stuff, into death metal. You need to have something. You can't really just go from, Motley Crue to Obituary. You need somebody to get you there. You need something that's a little bit heavier and a little bit more aggressive and a little faster and a little tougher on the vocals. So, of course, that was thrash metal. And, of course, the first band you got to get into for thrash would be, of course, Metallica. This was, of course, the mid-'80s, so I was a high school kid, I was a skateboarder, and noticed that a lot of skaters either got into punk or they got into thrash, and metal in general was just more appealing to me, so of course I had to get into Metallica. You would think that it would be Ride the Lightning or Master of Puppets that it would first draw me in, but actually those are my 2 favorite Metallica albums. But the album that actually got me into Metallica was Garage Days Revisited. I love this album. I wore out the cassette several times. Skating with my headphones on, it just kind of fit the mood. Now this is a very different album compared to their full-length albums. I mean, this is covers. It's a little more fun, I guess, and maybe that was one of the things that kind of drew me to it, is it had a little bit more groove to it. Interesting is that this is actually the first recording that they did with Jason Newsted, and the bass on this album kills. Really good bass playing, real good tone, real, a lot of depth, a lot of fills, and then they did And Justice for All, and pretty much left them out of the mix. Never really understood that. I actually like this album better than Injustice for All. I know for a lot of people that's like blasphemy. Don't get me wrong, I do love that album, but this one for me, like I said, this one just got me into Metallica. I like the idea of the covers that they did, and like I said, the production. Also think that it was really cool that this is kind of a sticking it to the man sort of thing, that they actually went and put the price, the $5.98 EP, they put the price of it right there on the cover, so the record stores really couldn't rip people off. Well, at the time, try getting it for that price now. Good luck. Like I said, love this album, never get tired of it. I still listen to it all the time, and definitely a bridge for me. Like I said, once you got into Metallica, big bridge from, bands like Ozzy and Iron Maiden even into death metal. This is the bridge. This is the way. I should also point out that it's revisited because the single for Creeping Death, the B-side of that single had Am I Evil and Blitzkrieg, two other covers, and that was considered Garage Days Revisited. So that's why this is Garage Days Revisited. Number 5, Metallica, Garage Days Revisited. Number 4 is a big one. It's one of my all-time favorite bands. It is the band Motley Crue. And I know you probably think, oh, it's got to be Shout at the Devil, or it's got to be Too Fast for Love. Those are the big fan favorites. Well, actually, again, we're talking about what got me into it, what broke me in, and that is Theater of Pain. Now, Theater of Pain holds a special place in my heart because I grew up in a very conservative and very Christian home. When I say very Christian home, what I mean is, you might think, my parents maybe go to church on Sundays. My parents had the keys to the church, okay? Grandfathers on both sides were preachers of their own congregations. So, my parents tended to be parts of churches where they would make them sign a contract where they wouldn't listen to secular music or go to movies. Kind of crazy stuff like that. I'm not complaining. My parents did the best that they could, and I love them for it. But, it was a little strict on that kind of stuff. Right before I started high school, I moved from my mom and stepdad's house into my dad and stepmom's house. Just before starting high school, he was a little bit more relaxed on the rules and let me get into other kinds of music. But the one band that I always got in trouble for trying to sneak into the house was this one, this album. Buddy down the street had this album. I kept trying to sneak it in, and of course, oh, look at that scary pentagram. They were Satan, right? So couldn't have this in the house. I used to try and sneak it in different ways, put it in different record sleeves. Even snuck out to see him on the Dr. Feelgood tour and got in trouble for that one too. So maybe that's the whole reason why they remained one of my favorite bands for so many years. I think just that rebellious nature that drew me in and wanted to hear it more. And this album tends to get, kind of a bad rap. A lot of people will say that, only has one or two good songs on it, but I really like this album. I think a lot of the songs on it are very anthemic. Anything from, Fight for Your Right to Save Our Souls, Louder Than Hell, Keep Your Eye on the Money. That's still one of my favorite Motley songs. A lot of really good stuff on here. So, like I said, for me, it has a lot to do with the time where I was always getting in trouble, but still love this album. Number 4, Motley Crue, Theater of Pain. So for number 3, look at the pictures behind me. You know I'm going to choose Rush, right? By the way, I did these pictures of Neil on the wall here. Just saying. So of course, I have to pick some Rush because, they are my absolute all-time favorite band. So they've definitely had a huge effect on my life. Trying to pick which era or which album I really love the most, that's very difficult. I could probably easily do one of these 6 records about Rush albums, and it would be all over the board because on the one hand, one of my favorite albums of theirs was their last one, Clockwork Angels. It was really heavy, really returned to their metal roots, their rock and metal roots, really great concept to it, incredible songs on it. On the other hand, I really love Power Windows, but that's like keyboard laden, but still some of the best bass hooks on it. And of course, Moving Pictures, you know, I played in Rush cover band for a little while there, and you know, once I learned to play bass, like I was obsessed with them, and of course we played every song on that album. So picking one album for what would be my favorite, that would probably be near impossible, but picking the album that broke me into Rush and therefore having that effect on me would be Show of Hands. This might seem like an odd one, and actually it's really more the video than it is for the album, but before I got exposed to this, I was not a Rush fan. I never really got into them in high school, kind of thought, you know, I'm one of those people who didn't like Geddy's voice, didn't think they were rock enough, and I was in a new band, which was actually more thrash than anything. I just started playing bass, and so of course I was obsessed with the instrument and learning how to play it well. And I had moved into my guitar player's house. He basically gave me a couch to crash on, and he watched the Show of Hands video cassette concert every single night. It had to be at least for a month before that thing got warped and I had to buy another video cassette, but every single night. So on night one of crashing at his pad, I was like, oh man, Rush, this band kind of sucks. On night 3, I was like, well, this one song's pretty decent. On night 5, I was like, these are some pretty damn good songs, and these bass licks are amazing. A week later, I was a diehard Rush fan, and I was buying up everything that they had and listening to everything they had. And so it all started with Show of Hands. So number 3, Rush, Show of Hands. At number 2, this is a very special one because this is what broke me into all heavy metal outside of what was in the top 40 and what was popular on MTV. Remember, this is mid 80s, so I mean, you know, MTV still played music videos. And for you younger people out there, music videos, those were these little like mini movies that went along with a band's song. It was a really cool concept. You don't see those too much anymore. But anyway, so this album is what broke me into everything outside of what was mainstream, realizing that there were so many great bands outside of all that. And it also starts with kind of a sort of a sweet story about a young boy and the girl next door. Well, actually, she was the girl across the street. So I told you earlier about how I moved into my dad's house in high school, just before high school actually. And before that, anytime I would visit, I used to hang out with a pretty young girl named Joni Hacklin who lived across the street. And, you know, we would just kind of hang out every now and then. As we started to get a little bit older and closer to high school age, we would flirt a little bit more. And when I knew I was moving to my dad's, I was hoping to continue that trend. And, you know, what can I say? I've never went through a cooties phase. I was always into girls. Still am. So, I remember this clear as day. And my memory sucks, but I remember this very well. It was a summer day. I'd only been there for maybe a day or two. Just moved in and did have my stereo set up, fortunately, because there was a knock on the door. And I go to the screen door to see who's there, and it is Joni Hacklin, pretty as a flower, waiting there, and in her hands is this album, Dokken, Tooth and Nail. Standing at the door saying, you want to listen to this record? And I said, uh-huh. I would have said yes to anything. If she'd had a country album, who knows where we'd be. I'd probably be like, yeah, y'all want to hear a great album? So, Joni, thank you for this. This means a lot. You know, like I said, this was a band that really, like, you didn't see Dokken on MTV too much unless it was Headbangers Ball. Maybe every now and then. You really didn't hear them on the radio too much either. And it just kind of, you know, opened my mind to even more music that was out there. Just more exposure for me. And I think she also, at the time, if I remember right, she also had Cinderella's Night Songs with her. So yeah, anyway, I owe my love of metal to trying to get some action, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, that's my story. That's how I got into metal. Number 2, Dokken, Tooth and Nail. Alright, so for number 1, you know, I had to think back, you know, about what really got me into just hard rock into what went to heavy metal. And there's a lot of ways you could go with that. I mean, you could say like bands like Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and Kiss, and these are bands that I was familiar with. Even though I wasn't really allowed to listen to that kind of stuff, I knew who they were. I mean, you couldn't avoid Kiss, especially when my parents were telling me it stood for Knights in Satan's Service or something ridiculous like that. But those kind of bands, they were always there, and certainly there was some impression left by them. But the first album that I heard, now, I gotta say, one of the first bands that I ever bought and truly, fell in love with was Van Halen. And in fact, the first album of theirs I bought was 1984. But before that, the first album that I actually ever heard of theirs was this one, Fair Warning. This is still my favorite Van Halen album, and it's totally badass. It's much darker than most of their material. But what was interesting was, I was at that age where, somewhere around, between 9 and 13, you start kind of snooping around your parents' stuff, just trying to see what kind of stuff they're hiding from you, right? Mom always has candy somewhere. My mom's, to this day, she keeps candy hidden in every room in the house. There's chocolate somewhere there. And, all dads, even like dads who maybe they're against, having a Playboy, they all have that photography magazine hidden away that has a lot of boobs in that, so you got to snoop around and find that kind of stuff. Well, one of the things I found was my stepdad had a cassette with this album on it. It was a burned cassette, he'd recorded it off an album, whatever, and so, I didn't really know what it was. It wasn't anything to look at, but it said what it was labeled on there, and I listened to it, and my mind was just blown. This, just kind of opened whole new doors for me. And once I heard this, that just kind of started my explosion of wanting to get as much rock as I could. I had to get everything of Van Halen's. Like I said, this album is definitely a lot darker than most of their stuff. Mean Street, Sinner's Swing, Unchained, Dirty Movies, Sunday Afternoon in the Park. These are all fairly dark songs. Unchained is one of their heaviest songs ever. It's just a really cool album, and it just changed my life. So number 1, Van Halen, Fair Warning. Alright, so let's just do a quick review. Number 6, Death, Human. Number 5, Metallica, Garage Days Revisited. Number 4, Motley Crue, Theater of Pain. Number 3, Rush, Show of Hands. Number 2, Dokken, Tooth and Nail. And number 1 album that had a profound effect on my life and my musical taste, Van Halen's Fair Warning. That is my list and my first episode of 6 records. I would love to hear what your 6 biggest records that had an effect on your life are. Put it down here in the comments, let me know about it. Or you can also always send an email to medalofhonorshow@gmail.com. And also, I'd like to know your ideas for what we can do for future episodes of 6 records. 6 bands that are Swedish death metal, or 6 bands whose guitar player had an outstanding performance, 6 most underrated guitar albums, 6 best drum albums, whatever you can think of. If you can make up some kind of crazy category, I'd love to hear it. Again, put it down in the comments here or send it to the email, and I'd like to hear what you have to say about it and see if we can make that into a show. Alright, that's going to be it. Hope to catch you in the next episode of Medal of Honor, and as always, keep the horns up and keep the needle down.